Yeah, we think you're gonna have to mail that in.
Okay.
What? You get compensated for time on that one, or like how does that?
Well, I write off all the mileage, that's for sure.
Exactly.
It actually
Same as being
ended up,
compensated,
but ended up not. This warden can tell you I'm learning what it means to be an independent contractor, because my company doesn't want to pay payroll taxes in New York State.
Yeah, right.
So,
Which is ridiculous. It's not that big.
First thing to learn about being a contractor is that most of the time you're
not a contractor.
Yeah.
No.
It's
Oh, they
just a
don't treat
lie
you,
and it's
yeah.
illegal and you.
I don't know, but I
So they can save their.
I certainly treat my schedule as if I'm not a
Oh.
salaried employee, so.
Oh,
That's
there you go.
good.
All right, well, maybe we
So-
get the other option. Fair.
On one hand, my wife says I play a lot of golf during the day.
Golf is actually better.
On the other hand, I brought in, for my first year at the company, I brought in 4 times when they compensated me, so. I still sleep okay at night.
We should play more golf.
I should
Yeah,
be
that's
playing
what
more
I'm
golf.
saying.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like actually the trend line there, more golf,
Yeah,
you know,
right.
more productivity, like you gotta.
It's just.
I'm sitting over here. It's super weird that you have your own table.
That's where we
Is
sat
that
last time,
here?
but this is awkward too.
No,
Which is why I
I'm
moved
just
over.
like, he's got it. We don't want him that hall.
Why is it awkward?
He has his own table.
He's the executive.
I left you plenty of room.
I'm using it. I'm
Share
I'm
Wi-Fi
leaving
password
screen.
with
That's
Keith
better.
Hammond.
Are we live streaming right now?
We
I
are.
don't know if I trust
All right, Sammy, if you're ready, I'm ready.
I know, now I need to remember.
And I will call to order this inaugural second monthly meeting of the Village of Trumansburg Board of Trustees. A couple minutes late, 7:06, April 25th. Any changes to the agenda?
No.
Okay. We have our first public comment period, but I see no members of the public present in person or online, and which brings us to item number 4, which is reports of representatives. Mary, I don't know if you have anything to share from the town, or if you're just joining us.
Just a little. We had a lively discussion 2 weeks ago about the special events ordinance. And we will be holding, I think, a public information session for that, for the change in that local law, as well as the proposed exotic animal ordinance. But those have not been set yet. Let's see. We also we appointed Liz Thomas and Elizabeth Garner as alternates to the planning board, and Kate Darfler as representative to the Conservation and Sustainability Advisory Committee. And the other item that I would bring up is that we were audited. I think I mentioned this before. We were audited by New York State, and they felt that we could use a little additional security in our IT system. So we requested funds from Senator Gillibrand's earmarks in order to do some of that enhanced security in terms of servers and software and things like that. So that's about all I have
Okay, great.
right now.
Any comments or questions for Mary?
No, great, thanks.
Well, thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
Okay, item number 5 on our agenda is some board reports. Very briefly, I'll mention that we did conclude our deer management program for the is that 7th or 8th year now. Only 25 deer were taken. It seems that, well, we don't have any conclusions to draw from that, whether it means that the population is down somewhat, or if the deer have become overly accustomed to the particular sites which have not changed since the first year. But in any event, the participants enjoyed the season. They plan to be back next year. And no reason not to continue at this point. I don't remember if I mentioned this in our first meeting or not, because I don't remember the date that we filed it, but I did, MRB at my direction did put together a funding request, speaking of Senator Gillibrand, put together a funding request from all three offices, so Senator Schumer, Senator Gillibrand, and Congressman Reed, in the amount of $3 million for the construction of the new fire and EMS building. So that has been formally submitted, and we'll see where that leads. Camp Barton. So at the end of March, we had a meeting of what we're calling just a working group at this point, with members of the from the town of Ulysses, town of Covert, and myself and Ben Carver, and we started talking about kind of the structure of the organization. But then on April the 7th, so just prior to our last meeting, we had an in-person meeting at State Park headquarters here at Taganik with a large group. It was Fred Bond from the park, Mike Reynolds and Deb Nocky from the town of Covert, 4 members of the Baden Powell Council, 4 members in person from the Albany Real Property team of the Office of Parks and Recreation, and then joined virtually by 3 more members of the Parks team, as well as the executive director of the Boy Scouts Council. They had some appointments that morning, so I missed the walkthrough of the camp, which, as it turned out, was fortunate for me because it rained all morning. But everyone else there did walk and tour the camp. The lady who appears to be in charge of the real property team, her name is Lynn, said that for the first time in her 30-year career, she did not see any red flags that would prevent the park from walking away from purchasing the property. And then there were some questions from a gentleman by the name of Andy, I forget his last name, who I think is one of the deputy commissioners in Albany, with respect to what does the structure of the entity look like? Is there going to be any legal problem with, he was asking their attorney who was here, not there, whether there would be any concerns about the licensing depending on what this entity looked like. And no one saw any problems with it. So where we stand now is Parks is working on the licensing agreement that they'll present to us. There's some movement on the part of this working group to form an LDC, a local development corporation, to become the entity with which the parks license the operation of the property. There's some questions about what goes into an LDC. Ulysses attorney is looking into those details, and have an update for you after we gather together again, once the attorneys are convinced that that is or isn't the way to go. Parks will be ordering 2 appraisals on the property. They have to send that out to bid. Once those are awarded, it's about 75 days. So we're looking probably midsummer when they'll have the appraisals back. They will take the higher of the 2 appraisals, not the average. At least that's their stated intention. And that's what they will be willing to pay Scouts. It sounds like Scouts are not worried that it'll appraise too low. So that's where we stand as far as that goes. There's nothing for this board to decide on yet. We still have to kind of flesh out the details of what the governance structure of this new entity will look like, however it's formed, or whatever the structure happens to be. It'll be up to us how we want to self-govern. So we're working through that.
Has there been any conversation about that yet, or it's just,
There's been a lot of conversation about
okay. Is there some cohesion or not quite yet?
Yeah, right now we're somewhere in the neighborhood of talking about 2 members from each of the municipalities on a board of directors style structure.
And a chair?
We seem to be in a rotating chair.
Okay. Your term?
Secretary, we haven't gotten the terms yet.
Okay.
There seems to be an interest, kind of a a morbid interest in finding out if we do it that way, that means we have 6 board members. Do we need a tie-breaking vote, or do we just not proceed if it's 3-3?
I would like to second the morbid interest.
Yes.
With that.
I'm
There's
very
a definite
curious.
fascination. But it's like,
I'm very, very curious.
yeah.
There's also, I think would be helpful if we had non-voting members, or at least offer non-voting seats to folks like someone from the parks. There's a not-for-profit that was established rather quickly last year that does have some money available for the preservation of property. We want to invite them to participate. Do we want to make those permanent seats? Do we want to be able to invite other organizations if one kind of peters out and then someone else pops up that seems to be helpful? That's all kind of still up in the air. So I don't know if any of this will be dictated by the type of structure we end up using. Like an LDC requires a certain kind of governance structure or not. I don't know. The attorneys are going to earn their hourly rate.
It could be interesting, and then we don't have to go into depth about it, because I'm sure you'll go through it as your team, but to consider perhaps a property owner as a 7th board member. Just saying, could be a can of worms, could be interesting.
Well, the property owner like parks.
No, I mean, I'm sorry, an
Like a
area
local-
local.
Oh, I see. A neighbor.
Just as,
Yeah.
it could
Could
be
be.
great, could be weird, just saying. It could also be a 1-year appointment, I don't know, whatever. Okay, I won't say anything more about that. That sounds great, thank you.
So that's what I have for my update. And we'll move on then to, unless anyone has any questions, feel free to yell at me if you do. We'll move on to fire, TACC, ETC, and CWIO.
So I have really the only thing to bring to this meeting since the last time that we met is where we are with 150th, which is that the Historical Society is partnering with the Encore Players for Friday night. So they will do historical skits at the Historical Society, more details to be fleshed out and then put up on the forthcoming webpage. So that's great though, that we really wanted it to launch unless there's any opposition.
That's ahead of Porch Fest.
Correct. So Friday, the 10th of June, to sort of launch it and set like a historical tone. And then we're carrying on as usual with Saturday, which would be with the permit has been submitted to close up Union Street as part of Porch Fest. So that's thing. And Sim Redmond is on board. So that's set and financing is coming in. Porch Fest goes on as usual. That, just as a reminder, is Porch Fest is 12 to 5. The stage will be 5 to 6:30. We're hoping the mayor will say something to bring us all together, a la Winterfest.
Okay.
Or is the mayor in town?
Yes. Maybe.
Excellent. And also probably going to try to get a drone group photo. I think you had mentioned that you might have a connection. So we'll, as we get closer, we'll.
Is that
we'll have
Saturday
those
night?
details.
Is the-
Yeah,
Simmer.
yeah. So from 5 to 6:30 and then like launch everyone into the village. So, hey, everyone.
Like,
who's a
literally
business-
like catapult, like.
Yeah,
Is that part of the
like
historical
pumpkins.
skits?
Like pumpkins or
That's how it started.
or cows from Monty Python.
Okay.
Chalabash, it'll be like that. Because we're an ag community, pumpkins and cows. And then Sunday, we are definitely on board for lawn games at the farmer's market with a potluck picnic. So everyone can bring their own items. We'll have croquet, bocce, and I'm hoping cornhole. And we can also use the giant annex. And I will connect now the fire department and also Rotary are not interested in a barbecue. So I'll connect and see if sports boosters or arts boosters want to do it. Again, it's an opportunity. The whole notion of this was, here's an opportunity. Do you want to leverage it? And we are close to a banner presentation for all of you to look at for the designs, just highlighting it's fairly simple blue and white so far, 150th Village of Trumansburg thing. And just a quick test, since I don't have a graphic to show you, do you like the waterfall image? Like when we do Trumansburg and we do Taganic, do we like that? It's on the firefighter badge has that. We've seen it on stickers. Does anyone have a gut?
EMS has it as
I
well.
really liked it. I think
Yeah, do
we
we,
should take more ownership of that
Yeah.
major attraction.
it is a major attraction.
And not
I don't not make it would be alternative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, just to highlight
And Trump
150 and
record.
like a banner and like that, just to not have it be a focal point of the graphic. it tends to, when graphic designers, sorry, because I didn't hear all of what you said, but when graphic designers tend to play with that, they make it like the center, so there's also an option of it being part of the thing, but not the, but I
It'd be
think
interesting to see what it looks like.
we like it though, right? We like the ownership of that. Okay, so that's where that's going, and we have, as you know, Jen Demarest on the ETC committee. That's moving forward. I should also mention that everyone please promote the duck race as part of the village yard sale on May 14th. And Tammy, I want to make sure that I was correct when someone said how the village has promoted that, the yard sale, which is that it's on our website as an event on the ETC page. It's on the community calendar, and it went out on a water bill.
I think I have enough room. I also have it as on the printed map that I put together for yard sale day.
So
it's
tell me
on
about
as
that. Can
well.
you tell me about that map? Because I apologize that I don't know.
Where
is that?
I'm collecting addresses, names and addresses right now, and then I map them out on a map, and I publish the map with a list of addresses that are, so basically we're just handling advertising.
Yeah.
And then it's, we've been doing it long enough, it kind of just takes over.
That goes on the webpage, it goes on the village website, that map?
Yes.
Where does the, okay, and then if people want to be part of the yard sale, is that already, and again, I apologize if that's already on the website, do they know how to contact you if they want to be part? It's on the website?
It
Cool, great. So, and the Rotary is content, there had been some conversation about what if there's a drought? But then there's just a drought. And so they might have children help herd ducks if there's not enough water, but that's it. Does anyone?
They always do. The ROS crew always has.
We could just get a little fire hose action going down the creek, is that bad? Use of
Do a
water.
dam and release the dam.
So
White water.
you could, but that's DEC issues.
Yeah, details.
But I'm pretty sure that they're
What if
just
they're
gonna,
training at?
I think they're gonna,
that day?
I think that the fire company is something they consider, and that, I just would be so surprised if we're in a super drought in 2 weeks. If we are, then I'll connect with
If-
us and. fire
Sincerely, the
company.
ROS guys, they do that already.
What's that?
There's always duck herders. There
Yeah,
are.
no, I know, yeah, there were last year, this is just the second time, it's fine, but.
It's
Part of it. I've had a couple of requests already, or requests, I've had a couple of questions already asking when we're going to start publicizing dates for around Porch Fest 150th.
So, yep, I'm thinking the beginning of May. So we have an ETC meeting this week to, then we can launch the page for the beginning of May, which is more than a month in advance, it's a month and a half,
Right,
June 11th.
right, well, yeah.
So I know people are anxious, but Porch Fest schedule isn't solidified, so they're not fully promoting, but we now, and we just got our players as of,
Yeah, I'm not
Last
suggesting
week.
that we have to have the full programming for the weekend publish, but just more, stay tuned, here's the
Yeah.
dates. I think
So-
starting that, well, it's
next week.
maybe in the second, maybe in 10 seconds anyway, but
So by Monday, does that make you comfortable? By Monday, which is the first Monday of May? There can be a Facebook presence with a page and an itinerary that's already in existence that can be fleshed out. Okay. I have nothing else to report.
okay. EMS,
So we can go over the details of this.
are you in the waiting room, Ben?
I am in the waiting. That is me. I have a slide deck to share for the stretch code piece.
Oh, cool.
So I wanted to be able to, yeah, I did. So I don't like that actually. I don't like seeing myself. But that's for the next piece. For the EMS wage piece, I mentioned this last time, looking at trying to raise EMT salaries in particular, because there some of them below 15, and Joel sort of got in there and was like, hey, wait. So we looked over it. We had some back and forth. Gordon helped us sort of put together kind of a scheme for it. And what we found eventually is that if we align this coming budget year's salaries with people's experience and then their hiring, what their hiring rate would be, that we actually increase salaries by enough that it was very close to what we were kind of gonna do when we started, just from scratch.
Okay,
So I can go over the details of those numbers and kind of like that, it's like an executive session, I don't want to talk about individual salaries, but that's sort of the conceptual framework that we're going for.
I did do the math on the increases, it's somewhere in the $8,000 to $9,000 total,
oh,
including state retirement and FICA Medicare. So it's
wow, okay,
not a big change to the village. It's not nothing, it's not a big change.
But it is, I mean, you'll see when we talk about this, but it is meaningful increases.
Yeah.
You know, like it's meaningful. It feels like a win-win.
Okay. Anything else EMS you stack?
Geez, no, not really. That's really the only EMS item. I don't have anything in general for EMS, other than that article came out. There was an article about the report that I wrote that came out that's sort of vaguely EMS related.
Yeah, the article wasn't that vaguely EMS related, it was all about it.
Well, like Trumansburg,
Oh, I
I
see.
mean, it's EMS related for sure, but it's not exactly Trumansburg. It's more of a broad statewide situation. But no, other than that, nothing really on any of those.
Okay.
Actually, no, that's not true. Sorry to go back and forth. We did have our tree committee meeting last week, I want to say. It's been a while since we met and a fair amount had changed. One of the things that we're thinking about, and I mentioned this, I believe, last year when this came up, was that at this point, our risk assessment goes from 1 to 10. 10 being worst, the most risky, sort of immediate concern, and 1 being something that is irrelevant in terms of risk. And we have essentially within the village taken out all of the trees that were between 10 and hopefully with this last piece between 10 and 7. So we'll be down to
Awesome.
6 and 5 and then some others. And obviously those things get worse as things progress and that kind of deal. But we are hoping at this point in our next inventory, which is something that we've been doing annually, to include planting locations so that we can start transitioning towards like a maintenance of the community forest kind of a protocol, which is something that, like, for me has kind of been the goal from the beginning. Once I got over the immediate shock of like how risky the trees were when you sent me that first inventory, which was a terrifying moment. But so I'm really excited about that. Yeah, I mean, that's really the big news
That's
there. So
great.
hopefully the next time we talk budget, it will be more about planting and more about you know, kind of forward-looking, optimistic.
when do you do the
Thanks.
annual review? Sorry, is that a fall thing? To see how
It's
this is
spread
compared?
out. So
Okay.
we do our inventory generally early summer, late spring. But
Okay,
it's a volunteer group sort of doing things at their own pace.
oh,
So
okay,
there's like a training session where I sort of reacquaint everyone with like, this is the risk matrix that we use, and this is, you know, we do a small stretch of road and kind of go over it together. And then everyone gets divvied a piece of the village and goes out. That's it.
okay, great, cool,
But it takes, you know, a few months depending on people's availability and stuff.
sure, okay.
Actually, we saw you last year. When you saw us all together, that was
Like,
the,
right,
that was
yeah.
the like introductory sort of reacquainting meeting.
And it does take a very long time to say anything in English, so that works. You like that?
And dishes.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Okay, anything for DPW, water, sewer, CPGR, farmers market?
Oh, I think just so many things. I'll try and keep brief. CPZR, the big update there is that we are substantially done with changes to the core of the body of the zoning ordinance that we're attempting to get to for this year.
Great.
We have work left to do in definitions. Some of that is just cleaning out things that are actually never used in the body of the zoning ordinance. Some of it is trying to go a little more user-friendly to read and understand for the layperson. Some of that is cleaning up where things are unclear. So we're still working through that, but the rest of it is pretty much done. We have a clean version of it. The hope at this point, and so actually before I get that, I've now met with EDR as well, and they have a calendar kind of getting us from here to there by the end of the year. The hope is to get something out to this board, the zoning and planning board, and Guy in like June timeframe to get kind of early comments on for passing back to the committee to look at any comments. Hoping for, this is all very broad strokes, but hoping for a public information meeting sometime in September after the end of summer. And then moving towards all the steps of seeker and review and so forth into the fall, October, November, into December for adoption. That's a good case scenario. We'll see how that goes through. There is going to be, obviously, I expect people to show up and I expect comments and input. I'm going to try and continue to push people into giving those at the various board reviews of it as an early step before we kind of get to the public information, then the public information, then of course the public hearing. So there hopefully will be, at least 3 kind of major places for people to give comment and input. And obviously it'll be up on the website and people can feel free to email me and operator off and so forth.
So again, you're thinking up on the website in June?
Sometime in June,
Okay.
June, July at the latest, giving us time to look at it over July and August, and incorporate everything back in and then have something in September time.
That's great.
So we'll see how it goes. This is again focused on residential by and large. But that is, I think what a lot of people are most interested in. Farmers market, one thing I did find out is that the market board on the corner, the like wooden one on the corner that's kind of seen better days, it says market, it's got the time and date, has seen better days, and they're working to get that replaced. My personal take is I'm happy to have them kind of run with it. I know we've had in the past more input on signs and then also less wanting to have input on signs. So I wanted to kind of bring it back to this group to say, do I need to jump in and say we need to review some stuff and see some drawings, or are we happy to kind of let them run with that sign?
My impression was that we were reviewing all signs.
Yes.
Wasn't that the intent?
Yeah.
I think there was some confusion with reviewing of flags and maybe not wanting. I don't really care. I'm happy to tell them whatever we want to decide.
I was under the impression that we were reviewing all signs that were village property,
Okay.
which this is.
Yeah.
And again, the review is not like excruciating, but it needs to be in keeping with what the flow, because we were trying to establish that, haven't quite got there, of course, a style guide such that all village commonly held properties had a similar look and feel so that they could be easily identified and maximized for use.
At the very least, I think it would be nice if that sign, from a design perspective, somewhat matched the sponsor sign inside.
Right.
And I think there would at least be some symmetry between those two. So even if we go in a different direction for the gateway signs at some point, at least the farmer's market won't look like
Different.
one group made one sign and a completely different group
Yeah.
made the other sign.
We should definitely have review of this sign.
Alright.
And then if they want more definition of that to help them guide it.
I don't think they, I mean, it's a fairly simple sign.
But they could reach out. I feel like that, like if someone said to me, we're gonna review it, I might go, great, what are your parameters and what direction are you leaning? And I think Gordon just said clearly to match the interior.
I
But if
think,
they want more conversation, I think we should give it to them.
sure. I think at this point, I'm assuming they either have a design or they have someone who they're just letting kind of run with it. Because I think it sounded like this process has kind of moved further along before I was aware that it was happening. So, I'll jump in and ask them to.
Yeah, nothing should be erected on village property without the board's approval. Basically, is my feeling.
Especially since I feel like after the fiasco with the last time, I'm a little surprised that they didn't reach out to you like when they were just having the tiniest seed of this idea.
Yeah,
Like, as much as I agree that it's kind of like, I would prefer to just let you do it, like, on some level, they must know that that's
right.
like, this is not new information, and it's not like it was that long ago.
It's true.
I feel like to be inconsistent is just.
And again, to keep it in the notion, I think last board meeting, we were like, they're a department, I mean, the fire company would, the DPW would never just erect a sign without consulting the board and the commissioners. So.
I think, I'm kind of, I think they might, but I'm happy to, again, I don't need to belabor the point, I will get in touch.
I really like the look of this, of the sponsorships.
Yeah.
I think the design and quality of the work, I think it's fantastic.
And I can leave that out and just say the board wants to just have final sign off. If it's basically in the theme of that sign, we're probably all on board. but
Yeah,
we just
And
wanna
and again,
establish-
and you reiterate, you did such a good job.
Right. We want to just establish that. Wonderful. DPW water sewer. The Greg Street Bridge is slowly, hopefully moving towards something. We're going around in circles on the steel, but I think we've got that hopefully sorted out today.
Like where to get it?
No, just exactly the specs for it. So a lot of this is, we're building a bridge that's not really a bridge, but it's still a bridge. And so we have our, engineering firm giving us specs so that we can build a bridge that they feel comfortable with. And then competing people's opinions on whether that's the right approach or not. Short stories, we're going with what our engineering firm says. And I know Dusty has an eye on someone for doing the boring for the holes for it. So we're hoping, sometime in May, fingers crossed, that this might be something that happens. So we will see how that progresses. Sewer law is continuing to move forward. We have letters back from a lot of businesses regarding grease traps. So a couple questions outstanding on exactly who all qualifies for needing grease traps, but we're starting to get there and have that conversation. The capital project for water is continuing to move forward. MRB is working through early bits of that and getting back feedback to us and asking us questions that we need to give them information so that we can submit for that project for grants. And water rates continue to get interesting. I dug a little more deeply into some of the spreadsheets and found a couple of consistencies. So we're still working through that and how to phase that in, but getting closer to how to break it up so we can do it over 2 years. The water rates. And then one last quick reminder is newsletter. Please send department updates to me by Wednesday of next week. I think is the. No, I want
That would be the third.
Monday. Yeah, sorry, I was looking at the first, I think is what I had said, but Monday being the second. I'm sorry, but by a week from today. Looking for those to start consolidating all of that into something we can print and hand out.
Do you see the email I forwarded, or CC'd you on from Carol Grove at the Fleet Agent?
I did. I had a note to follow back up with her. She has not responded to me about more information, so if she, I don't get back from her soon, I'll get in touch with her.
Okay.
Or at least follow up again. That is what I have.
Okay. Please, Keith.
Only thing I would share is the stats I didn't get to share at the last meeting, which we'll go through them all because it's not much to report. 233 calls. Next month, weeks, we'll have our next law enforcement and public safety meeting,
Which we still need to actually pick a date.
which we have to figure it out. Yeah, I'm thinking 12. Or 12 minutes would be better for me now. So I'm time again. So of May 12th. And yeah, we did post something, and maybe some of you saw it about the catalytic converter.
Yes.
Somewhat related news, the antenna on my minivan is missing. It was a prank or a car wash pulled that out, but
Couldn't crawl under to get that would have been there, so they settled for the end.
yeah, I'm told that there's no real value in antennas. It's not something people steal, but it's gone. And my wife noticed it, but it was later in the day after going to an automatic car wash. So I feel like the car wash might be
The culprit.
the culprit here. So I think I cracked that caper pretty effectively. But no, always a good reminder to lock vehicles, especially those that are not in garages. Can't lock up a catalytic converter, I guess, but I don't know how you protect those.
My brother-in-law built this driveway so that the driveway comes up to just under his car and he has to drive right next to it. It's an absurd extravagance, but his catalytic converter was stolen twice. And he was just like, "It's never
Not gonna
again."
happen again.
So,
Okay. Nothing from the treasurer, and she's excused for the evening. Tammy, do you have anything?
Nothing, except for the executive session matter.
And actually, Tammy, when you get that map for the yard sale, Keith, would you be willing to make a Facebook post about it? Because people are asking.
Yeah.
Cool. Can we coordinate that?
Yeah, I always put it up all over the place, but yeah.
On the
I'm
Facebook
happy to
too.
forward it.
Okay, so, because, you know, people are crazy for yard sales, so this is all like, everyone's just excited right now, the weather's
Yeah,
warm, they're
you
cleaning
don't
out their
have to tell
garages.
me that.
So
yeah.
they'll probably see something next week?
No, they'll see it Thursday, the 12th.
Oh, sweet, okay.
Yeah. I
There's
didn't
a spot to
even cut it.
shop, great.
Yeah, I didn't even cut off I don't even know what to call it. When I put out the post, I gave people till noon on the 12th.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
it's not even, it's more than 2 weeks away, but, so that's great, good, never mind,
Yeah,
Keith, you're
'cause
off
it
the
does,
hook.
yeah, it
And
takes
so
some
on.
time.
Thanks.
That's a relief.
Yeah, whew. Okay.
Okay, item number 6 on our agenda is stretch code.
I'm trying to think of the best way. I brought an HDMI converter so I can plug straight into that. Or I can just share my screen.
Whatever, sure.
That will go there anyway, right?
Yeah.
1 second.
So that's,
1 second.
I actually have to open it too, so that's. I have to remember where. There's like stages for this.
Well, you're a co-host, you can share the screen.
So I'll just start out. I realized that I've brought this up several times, maybe too many times, but I never really started at the beginning in terms of why we're doing this and what it is. I think I just basically sent out, here's all the information, figure it out for yourself. And then I kind of mentioned it very quickly in a meeting. So what I wanted to do was sort of walk through a little bit more. I mean, the purpose of this job is really like vision setting and deciding the direction to go. So I wanted to walk you all through my thinking on that and how I arrived where I arrived and why. This is a super weird. So this looks like a presentation. It's not really a presentation. I just put these slides together so that there's a visual aid. And by that, I mean, you know, like jump in. This is not something that I've like really thought through in detail or pre-prepared. But I wanted to emphasize, first of all, that this is sort of all driven by the comprehensive plan, I think by the general feeling of people in the village. It's not just a personal, I mean, it is also a personal quest and, you know, whatever it is. But I think this is something that was pretty heavily emphasized in the comprehensive plan. And really, I mean, strong terms, right? The single most critical challenge facing the village. So that's sort of where we begin. This is, I think, some of the broader strokes, and Ben, feel free to fill in anything here if I'm missing things. But these were kind of the big projects that we've done over the last, I think this started with Rachel, very beginning, in my experience, and I don't know if it was in and out before that, but I would say 2015.
Yeah, 15 is what I was gonna say.
So it's been a long time. These things are super meaningful, actually. So weirdly, the wastewater treatment plant, which was not undertaken for sustainability reasons, really, aside from water pollution, I guess, but not in terms of energy reduction, has been one of the biggest movers in terms of reducing our energy footprint. And then I imagine the streetlights will start to see soon making a pretty big dent too. But these are, I think, in general, they're really focused on infrastructure. And they're really focused on our energy consumption in terms of our utilities specifically as it relates to infrastructure. So infrastructure in my mind is something that in biggest terms, we should be looking at much more broadly and much more holistically. So like when we think about stormwater, when we think about trees, when we think about buildings, all of those things to me have a sustainability component that should, for me, form sort of the foundation of our planning for those things. This is sort of where I begin. Operations as well, I think our operations, we've done a lot in terms of like our static infrastructure, but in terms of our vehicles, in terms of our energy use more broadly, we've done very little. So that's another place that I think we should be expanding. And then just the broader community. So outside of village infrastructure, outside of village owned services and operations, there's a lot that we can do. This is why over the last year, I've talked a lot about community choice aggregation, which, as sort of a side note / tangent, is moving along. There, I have an update that I can share from the town of Ithaca. That's sort of moving along. I'm hopeful that pretty soon we'll be able to just kind of join an already established thing, which takes some of the fun out of it, but also a lot of the tedium and work. So I'm excited about that. But the other opportunity there in terms of community and changing community resources and how community relates to energy use is the stretch code. But actually I'm jumping the gun since it's the problem of not preparing a presentation. So actions to sort of target those things. This is another thing that I brought up. Do we want to continue sort of the practice that Ben and I have started where we're rotating a sort of sustainability lead? To me, I think that's great because I think that allows us to, as a board, develop the sort of institutional knowledge and understanding of what sustainability means at a broader level in a way that will stick with this board.
I'm sorry, what do you mean by rotating the lead? Like that somebody on the
So
board
Ben did
takes
it
the
for
lead?
2 years.
Oh, okay,
Something like that in 2 years.
okay,
And then
okay,
and Rachel had done it and passed it to Ben, Ben passed it to me.
okay.
So to me, I think that's great because it kind of builds that frame of mind and that perspective into this board. And I think that's a really effective way to continue making that a priority moving forward. Alternatively, I mean, my capacity is certainly limited relative to, say, a board or a commission that has 5 people that are, you know, retired or not retired, but really passionate about it. Right. So, I mean, there's trade-offs there. I don't know how to do that. I tend to think that the sort of rotating lead is the better option now, but it really hinges on one of us always being sort of available and willing, which is kind of a big ask, it turns out. But anyway, something to keep in mind. So 2, benchmarking. I think the benchmarking, that report that you saw, it feels kind of silly. I know that Vicky doesn't like it, but it is, in terms of understanding what we do and our impact, it is really an important thing. My hope is to kind of expand that to include things like vehicles, things like that. Another thing that I was hoping to do, and this is something that we'll have to have another deeper conversation about later, but is to start requesting an annual sustainability plans from department heads. So in the same way that we request a budget request, or we ask them, you know, what would you like to see for your budget this year? I would like to couple with that a sustainability plan and employee reviews. We've talked a lot about employee reviews, but I think it's something, and it's a direction that we just have to do it. We just have to take that step.
But
I don't think
well,
they'll
how do
enjoy it, but
employee reviews relate to sustainability?
oh, they don't.
Okay, you're just
Totally-
remembering
totally
and thinking
unrelated.
about it right now. Okay,
Yeah, I think just in terms of reporting that we ask our department heads
Okay,
to do,
yeah,
they're just 2 logical steps.
sure.
Um,
Can
but
I interrupt it further, since I already
Yeah.
have, to suggest that when we, especially if we're implementing a new notion of the sustainability plan, that you give maybe some examples or guidelines or parameters.
Oh,
For
yeah.
example, what is your goal to,
Yeah, no,
Okay.
absolutely. And I mean, we would have to talk about that
Okay.
and decide if we want to do that anyway. This is just a suggestion.
because like, you know, always having coffee in the coffee mess is a good sustainability plan. But maybe not.
Yeah, it would depend. And it would depend on the department, it would depend on what we want, what our board wants, and what the budget, it would depend on a million. And then, so there's also just broader steps to encourage community involvement and community change. So the approaches there are generally, and again, feel free to add more, but to my mind, at least, the catalyst approach, which is like what NYSERDA has done to make us do all of this, which is essentially provide these little sort of small grants for different actions. It's also the approach that I've taken with the tree program, sort of provides small incremental motivation, incentives. We can also mandate things, so we can say everyone in the village has to paint their house blue and put solar panels on it. You know, I mean, we have that power, as weird and totally inappropriate as that would be. And then the other option is to regulate. So as people do things, we can say, okay, you can do what you want, but you have to do it in this way, which is how the stretch code would work. It's also how building codes work in general. It's also how zoning works. It's generally how, you know, like traffic law works. If you're going to drive, this is the way you have to drive, that kind of thing. So brings us to the stretch code. Stretch code is very, very simply an update to the code. So what Tom enforces on a daily basis. The general goal is to make energy use 10 to 12% more efficient. It does increase the cost of building a new house. And I do want to emphasize that this is only for new buildings or major renovations. So this wouldn't be something that would have to happen to houses that already exist. But so for those houses, it does cost more. The intent is that you would recoup those costs over time. So I'll show you a chart in a second that shows you how long that generally takes. The other thing I want to emphasize is that New York Stretch is designed, or is the general intent of New York Stretch is to stretch in the sense that this puts us maybe a year or 2 years ahead of the normal New York code. So this is not like, I don't know if this is points for or against, but in any case, it's not a radical departure from the current code. It's just a stretch to get us sort of to that next incremental place.
Can I ask a question at this point, which is, I think that's super significant if you think of our village, which we have identified as aging housing stock, that if you wanted to do a renovation on your existing home that wasn't significant, such that you were adding another wing, and so defining significant feature, but you wouldn't then be required to revamp your entire envelope. You are just living with it, because that will be significant, I think, to a lot of homeowners if they're thinking about the comfort of this.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so again, it applies in the same way that code would. So in the same way that, like, if you put on a porch, you don't have to insulate your walls, right? Like it's compartmentalized. But so this is the basic premise of the stretch code. Requires improvements to the general envelope of your house, which is basically just insulation, lighting, electrical, and then it requires, these are the two that sort of trip people up that tend to be the most contentious, requires readiness, which is for EVs, which means charging portals that go out to a garage or something like that, and for heat pumps. So that's the heat pump, right? And then there's like tubing that goes along outside. So in a new home, that tubing, that conduit would be built into the home. So you don't have to have heat pumps, and you don't have to have an electric vehicle, and you don't have to have photovoltaics on the roof or anything like that, but you do have to have the conduit in place. So if you ever did want to charge an EV, it would just be a matter of threading the cable through the conduit. It also requires upgrades to the breaker in order to support that capacity. And then the other piece is mechanical ventilation for residential buildings. And that, to me, this is the piece that really is controversial.
Is EV higher than 220?
So I think it would be, it could be. It depends on what you're installing. Most isn't, certainly. Like a level 2 charger, which is just like the standard home charger, it's 220. But I think because it's, you know, another 220 breaker, I don't know enough about the electrician's trade to really tell you what that
There's also
requires in
different-
terms of upgrades.
And I know this because I went to an EV meetup on Saturday, hosted at our Trustees Farmers Market space. There was also different amperage levels too. It was like I saw with Ann Corman's Tesla, there's like a 110 plug, there's a 220 like a dryer plug, and then there's a 220 4-prong different looking thing that's a 50 amp 220 bridges. I've never seen before, but that also.
I don't think you can do that at home.
That must be a charging station situation.
Ann actually did do that for her, so she's
Oh.
also like, she has experience being in the building inspector.
I think you can do 50.
That was how I first met him.
You can
Yeah.
do 50 and 220.
Yeah, it seems standard-ish And so I don't know what the.
So this is
requirement
not, that is not included. I mean,
Yeah.
this is, I think it's just the 220, I should double check that. I'll make a note.
But
Again, I
That's
always
right.
pretend that someone's gonna look back on this meeting and or is secretly listening, and we don't know. The cost of putting that in at the initial build instead of retrofitting it, because the idea is we're heading in this direction, we're stretching until we
Right.
get where we're anticipating we're going. So to do it at the onset makes a lot more sense.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, if you.
Even though
compare
right now it
this,
sounds like we're building flying cars, like we're not.
I do have a question about, and I can wait till the end if it's easier, but I do have a question about where we define or how we define major renovation
Yeah,
and what's included in that.
Right.
So if someone does, if someone guts a bathroom, depending on the size of the bathroom, I don't know, it certainly requires a building permit. If it's an interior reno, it makes sense that that space would be required to go to stretch code for envelope, windows, et cetera. But at what point does the renovation become large enough where if you're doing, a few years ago, I did a full kitchen gut. So that means all new electrical in the kitchen. Am I then now in a place where we're running new electric, so I have to be running conduit for something? Where's the line of demarcation there?
So my understanding, and this really is a common question, so I'm gonna tell you what I remember of him telling me. But is that it is compartmentalized. So there's no point at which you would redo your kitchen, or even your kitchen in the next room and the next room, and then have to do something else in, the other wing of the house that was untouched. I don't believe that happens. Now you would, if you redid your kitchen, you would have to change the ventilation. So the pieces that apply to your kitchen. And part of that is the mechanical ventilation piece, which is like the hood on your stove would have to be, I don't know if you have a mechanical hood on your stove, then it would be fine. It would change slightly, though there is a testing requirement, so you would have to test that hood to make sure that the air is actually going outside. So there's
As opposed to a cosmetic hood.
we had
it's a thing.
a screw in the wall that was preventing the flap to open. So when they did a renovation, they're like, oh, you should, now it actually will work. You just turn on the fan and the flap would open.
Why's the kitchen getting smoky? Fans on.
Exactly, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Testing this bit.
And the other piece I want to emphasize about the ventilation is that when you secure the envelope so that air is not freely moving in and out, it increases the insulation, but it also makes it more likely that you will die.
yeah.
Because oxygen, is a necessary component of life. So to me, the ventilation is a very logical step. But it's also, I think, because it drives the cost increase. And it feels frivolous, I think, to people who aren't thinking about insulation, about the kind of things that we think about when we think about energy.
2 years post-pandemic is a great time to talk about proper air exchange, however.
Yeah, no, it's actually huge. And for people that are using gas stoves, which I think a lot of people are, have gas in the village, it really puts out a lot of bad shit. Like,
Yeah.
I heard that from a friend. I was like, no, you're making this up.
No,
I did some
total,
digging,
yeah.
like, they've done studies with like cook a Thanksgiving dinner and like track your indoor air quality.
Yeah.
It's terrible. It's like really not good.
You sleep really well that night, you thought it was dirty.
Right, so it's like,
He woke up hungover and it was like,
right, so there's real benefit, personal benefit to these things.
so one thing I do want to emphasize here is that this analysis was done, I believe, 2018-19. So like inflation, building costs have gone sort of nutty are not computed here. So I want to emphasize that because I don't know how that would play out. I don't imagine it helps, right? Like, I'm sure that has driven this simple payback. over
Not when
years.
it's 7 months of residential windows right now.
Well, kind of, yes, right, but I'm curious, it's curious to think, if the cost of lumber has gone up, so the frame of your house is now cost just that much more, and I don't know if insulation has changed, if foam insulation prices have stayed relatively similar, it could be a difference in like the actual percentage of increased cost in your house, but I'm
That's true.
totally speculating.
If your
fully
windows,
percentage,
it's gonna be
sure.
your windows and doors, or double what they were 18 months
Yeah,
ago.
well, and windows, it might be a higher level of window for this, I don't know what the requirements are, so that
I'm
could be
sure
a
they're
difference or not.
The kitchen hood system's gonna be expensive too.
The whole thing is, and if the actual material isn't, then the labor's gonna be like.
Yeah, but so is the
without
cost of
question.
heating and so is food and so is
Right.
all that.
Yeah.
So, okay,
Yeah, so that's sort of where we are. The thing I want to emphasize here,
that's
is
a great
that-
return on investment. That's great.
right, so the
That's
payback doesn't happen immediately, it doesn't happen quickly. Well, I mean, it depends on how you define quickly, right? Like a
On a
single
30-year
family home,
mortgage,
6 years,
Yeah,
even if you assume that that doubles.
Yeah.
That's still very reasonable, and in terms of the overall value of your home, I think it's a substantially good thing.
I think we
And
would only,
19.7% energy
You
savings.
lose all that savings when you get reassessed as a.
I think a lot of people, as we keep going forward, are gonna see, they're gonna start looking for that as part of their thinking about a house, right?
We go as they go, and I get reassessed.
So I think that actually is already happening. But so this is sort of the commercial savings, and you can see this is sort of all over the map, and who knows, I mean, this, I imagine, especially over the last couple of years, is just fully a crapshoot to know how well this analysis held up.
We don't have many 20-story high-rise apartments or warehouses.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
a lot of it's closer to the lower end of that too.
Yeah, and hopefully no warehouses or. Well, warehouses aren't outside their own possibility, but anyway, you get a sense of sort of how this plays out. Now, in terms of people and how they evaluate, so when I first started looking at this, and the reason that I sort of spanned everyone with this is all the information, and I mentioned it briefly, is I thought at that time it would be a very simple, like, it's not hugely impactful for the village. Village is relatively built out. There's not a huge number of new homes coming in. So the impact would be fairly small. I assumed that the process would be fairly simple. Turns out the process is not simple. But anyway, long ago, almost a year ago, I had Tom review this. I asked Rick Geiger to review it, and Rick brought it to the full planning board. So that upper left quotation is from Rick personally, just on sort of an initial review, and then that bottom one is from the planning board review. But what I want to emphasize here is that Tom made it very, very clear that basically in the village, this is something that's already happening. The stretch code requirements are almost, it's like barely a stretch for us in the village. So this is something that homeowners are already cognizant of, already care about, already doing. So it's a fairly small ask in terms of, if we're regulating things that are already happening, the sort of the shift that we're asking for is pretty minimal. That said, I still think it's fairly important. One, because it just sort of, it tells builders, it tells people in the community that this is something that's important for us and that they should expect this to continue, right? That they should expect these requirements to advance, and this should continue to be something that they care about and continue to be something that they take into account when they're building, when they're, doing a bid for a house, or they're planning a house, or, those kinds of things. So all that said, the process is sort of the sticking part. Now, I told you, Guy wrote me a short email. The email was basically,
Yeah, I didn't believe you then.
I can show you. The email was just like, I don't care what you want, you have to do secret. So here we are, we have to do secret. Which I think is both hilarious because it's so obviously true. Like I can't, even my paltry legal knowledge is like, yeah, that makes sense. I can't argue. And because no one else did it. So no one did secret when they passed this.
Oh, funny.
But guys like, no, you should do secret.
Fine, do it.
Yes,
Great.
all right. But anyway, so that's sort of where we are. The way that it gets implemented is essentially we have local law 2 of 2011, which is the administration and enforcement of the New York State Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code, that basically incorporates into village law the code. So it says we enforce the code in the village. The way that this gets adopted, and you can read this maybe if you can read that, but is essentially it incorporates the New York stretch code into that definition. So initially, Guy had some reservation about what he called an adopt a code, a way to include a law by reference. But he seems okay with that now. I'm not sure what changed, if that was him looking into it. This again is something.
Well, also,
that-
it sounded like the way they developed the stretch code was that it could be implemented that way, right? When we got the presentation from Lou,
Yes, that's
So-
definitely their intent.
So maybe then when the lawyer looked, there was like, oh, they did a good job.
I'm not sure the guy would ever look at this. I don't know. That's,
It's not that.
I think he must have changed his mind onto his own devices. I don't know.
All right.
But anyway, all of this brings us to whether we'd like to proceed, how quickly we'd like to proceed. There is grant money on the table if we sort of move quickly. Grant money that I think would be about $10,000. So in my mind, it's kind of enough to be like, well, if we're gonna do it anyway, then let's hurry and just get it because we can, but not enough that if there's debate and we want to think about it, it's not enough grant money that it should change what we were gonna do anyway, right? Other than maybe make it go a little faster.
What does that money go towards?
So that's actually another piece of this is that we get to decide, but we have to propose it. So there's a grant proposal that we have to submit. And we have to have specific projects in mind. And actually, I mentioned this a couple months ago, and my thought at this point is we'll put solar panels on the building. But I don't know if anyone has other plans.
Can I also just point out that if you've been talking about this since 2015 and it's 2022,
No,
that
we haven't been talking about this.
we've been talking about sustainability and you've been working on the stretch code for a while.
Yeah, just last year.
Last year, okay, so I just want to take away, and again, in case anyone in the public listens to this, the notion of hurrying this along is, it's been a year since we've all been thinking and working on it, so moving forward with feeling comfortable and making a decision is different than hurrying the process for a grant.
Right. And I also emphasize that the piece we would be hurrying would be procedural, not substantive, right? Like if we want to think about this, we should absolutely do that. It's more, how do we want to stack the seeker and the, that stuff? How do we want to sort of play the procedural game that gets this passed? And how quickly do we want to move those pieces? But all of that said, I'd be super curious. I know you had some reservations. Don't know what they are. I'm curious to hear what everyone else has to say.
My only reservations are procedural. I have not seen, I would like to be able to see, whenever this question has kind of come up once or twice. I'm never impressed with Tetra Tech's answer, which is, nah, it'll never affect those folks. I'd like to see a clear explanation or demarcation of when and what would be affected in existing home renovation.
So what is major renovation?
What is
Yeah.
major renovation?
I can ask Tom for.
Under what condition or circumstances would someone doing a whole first floor gut be forced to run electrical conduit for an EV that they will never buy?
Right.
But maybe the next homeowner will. So I get the intention.
Yeah.
But I just want to understand that clearly. If we double the numbers from a couple slides ago, $3,000 or $4,000 is nothing to a new home construction.
Right.
But it is if you're trying to redo a bathroom for $10,000.
Sure.
Which you're not going to do today, but
Right.
you're certainly not if you're going to have 30% of that. I have also not seen any comments from Guy on his sense of any of this. So if you want to just forward those emails. if you
Sure.
have any.
I can actually tell you just off the top of my head, so in the way that Guy does, he sort of addressed the legal stuff, and then he was also like, oh, by the way, I think you should carefully consider how this interacts with, affordable housing priorities.
Mhm.
I think that was his big attraction, aside from the legal questions, which I mentioned, the adopt a code piece, the sort of, incorporated by reference. He suggested that we investigate or do 239 review with the county and seeker. So those were his three.
I'm mostly interested in Guy's opinion on the legal side. I mean, the affordable housing part, we have 1, 2, 3. I think there's 4 large buildable lots. 2 of them are wooded. So best case, we're getting 10 to 12, maybe 15, not counting 46 South Street, 15-ish. We're in the dozen-ish range of land available for single-family homes. So if they would mostly be built to stretch code anyway, I'm not overly concerned about what that might do to the cost for those dozen.
Right, the renovation.
I am very sensitive to, retiree fixed income, living in a house that they would sell because it's too big, but they don't have anywhere to move. too, because they can't downsize kind of thing. So they decide to renovate.
Yeah.
And what's that gonna be? And then my last question is, if we adopt this, am I correct that we cannot enforce this on the school?
I don't know, does the code as it is apply to school? Because this wouldn't apply to anything new.
I don't know what we can and can't enforce on the school when they do construction. It's like it's my broader question. Because that's a huge energy user if they do a large capital project.
Right.
It is my
And I'm not
understanding,
entirely-
we don't have any
I-
jurisdiction over the school or.
Yeah, because they don't pull building permits.
Yeah, well, they don't burn it, they're not, they don't have goods in there.
I mean, what would be intriguing though is if they have something of their own that's equivalent.
Which they may, it's always in the back of my mind that other than the sewer plant, the largest user of energy in the village is the school district.
Yeah, I mean, by a huge margin. There's also a huge amount of money in TLCBA that, and hopeful, in state government that's going to hopefully electrify buses in the near future, so that'll be a big piece of it. But I don't know, I mean, I know that the town is considering this as well. I don't know what the likelihood of that is, but certainly I would imagine that the school might be more prone to pressure if we, both of us have just done it. I don't know if that's true or not. You would hope.
So anyway, those are the two, I wouldn't call them reservations, but rather maybe clarifications.
Yeah, well, I think that's good. I will say that my understanding is that renovations are compartmentalized. So you would never have to go beyond the scope of your thing. But I will clarify with Tom, because I think if that's not true, that is.
And that, right, that, I strongly echo the sentiment of investigating the quantification of substantial and or major renovation versus addition.
Right.
There's
I
a
mean,
change
so
there.
my understanding is just like any other code, right? This is just building code plus. So if you did a renovation of your downstairs basement, bathroom, you need to upgrade the electrics in the bathroom, but not in the room next door.
Right.
But if you've got your whole downstairs, you do have to improve the electric in the whole downstairs because you've touched it all. Like, it doesn't change the definition. I mean, it's still good to get Tom's particular, take or wording, or maybe you can join us next time and kind of walk us through a little bit, but it is code and it works the same way code works. So whenever you have to upgrade something by code when you're touching it, that's when you have to upgrade something by code. when you're touching it.
But the key point is when you're touching.
Yeah, but it's also, I mean, so the ventilation piece, for instance. What is, because I don't know, so this is just a question, at some point in a renovation, does the ventilation requirements of the stretch code require things like central air HEPA filters? I don't know, but that's a question.
No, that's a good point. The whole house things are a little more unique, right? Like, it's fine to say the electric in the wall needs to be upgraded when you remove it up the wall, but I see your point when it's talking about the whole house envelope or the air exchanges for an hour in a house or something like one of those.
Well, the threshold question is, yeah, if it takes you from a $10,000 project to a $20,000, that's unacceptable. But
Right. Well, I guess my assumption at that point is a $10,000 project is not going to touch substantially the house to the point where you worry about, running piping up to your roof for solar panels and so forth. I think that's more when you're looking at like $100,000 reno. Then maybe you're getting in the spot where you've torn enough of your pieces apart that Tom's going to say, hey, while you're at it, you're going to have to pipe something up there.
But you guys, I think it's gonna all come down to what area you're touching. If you're touching a bathroom or a kitchen or a major electrical mechanical aspect of your home, that could be exactly when the stretch code says, oh, while you're in there.
Well, what about
Versus-
what about just the furnace?
Right, like what does it mean?
Does that
Like,
mean I have to change how the whole house air exchange works?
exactly.
And that's the piece where I'd like to be educated on that, so that, assuming that we do adopt this, that I can defend it when someone says, oh, you're gonna make me go get more. No, only if
Well,
you
yeah,
bulldoze the house and build it, I want to be able to understand
right.
the ramifications of that.
Right. Yeah, so maybe, I don't know, maybe Tom's available to meet next time or just kind of give.
I mean, that's a pretty straightforward answer. I would be inclined to just email him unless you guys. would
That's,
like
no, that
him to
works,
come.
that works.
I'm happy either way, but to me, that threshold question is I think, fairly simple.
Yeah.
I will say it's very not simple when you read through the stuff. Very not simple.
And does that then mean if it's not simple, but it should be simple, does that then mean?
Well, it means I'm not a
there
code enforcement officer, but
are- Does that mean there are large enough areas that are open to interpretation?
I don't think so. So I'll send you the code. It's just, and not even just the stretch code. I mean, the code itself is horrifically confusing and built. It's one of those things that's like all laws are sort of cumulative. So it's like, it assumes that you know, there's so many steps before it that it's just like incomprehensible unless you've done the trainings. Or at least, that's my impression. Maybe I just don't know basic things that most people know.
I'll just throw out there that I'm very much in line with your thinking. I'm in favor of this and try to, if we just are kind of looking to make the procedural pieces move kind of in a quick fashion so that we can, capture that $10,000 grant money, I'm in favor of seeing if we can't line things up that way. I mean, I still think we should get our answers for some of these questions.
Yeah.
To the extent that we can kind of, raise a flag and if people have comments or questions, like come to the next board meeting where we'll likely be talking about this again, or, whatever that is, and give comment. I wouldn't wait until like the formal public hearing to start soliciting people's feedback.
Right.
But otherwise, yeah, I'm in favor of moving at this point. We have, it's been talked about, like this was saying for, 12 months or so at this point.
And
It's
I
kind
want
of
to
slow
reiterate again,
down.
I own that delay I own, so
Oh.
don't feel like we have to compensate. for
You,
that.
you can blame your most recent child.
I do, I blame him for so much, don't worry about that. But that is a good point, so do we want to try and get those ducks in a row? Do we want to like do the procedural steps and then have the debate concurrently? Is that something that we want to do? To me, it seems like for $10,000, why not?
Yeah,
But I also I don't want to give the perception that we're rushing this for the sake of $10,000, because it really is not enough money to
What's the deadline on that?
meaningfully impact anything.
End of June?
End of June, I believe, yeah.
well, we can't effectively move forward with cohesive debate if we don't have the answer to the questions that we just posed tonight. So if we get them, then we can move forward.
Right,
So
but
I
so
feel like
I think it's
one and the
important to
same.
separate the substance from the procedure. So we could move some of the procedural elements tonight without,
Okay,
or at least we can discuss whether we want to do that or not. And separate that from the substance of the thing. Right, so like if we've started seeker, that doesn't obligate us to pass the law,
Yeah.
right? Like they're separate.
Yeah, we're not obligated at any point to do anything until we decide to do it. So I don't mind.
Even after we've done it, we can repeal it. There's no obligation to that.
I'm happy to keep moving along on that. I mean,
yeah, me too.
this is much in the way like the zoning idea, at least I have in mind, is like continue to have debate while you're also moving through things. It does mean that if you get to the end and the decision is no, we really have to postpone this, it feels a little more frustrating, but like, so be it. It's better to like
Yeah.
have those conversations.
Right.
Hannah, you good for
Yeah,
that?
yeah, awful quiet.
Yeah, I thinking a lot about this, not from like the standpoint of being an expert, but just some questions that come to mind. What are so you had the two kind of reviews on the last slide there from Rick. What are there any common arguments of dissent against the stretch code, and what would they be?
So the biggest ones that I've heard.
Outside of like government is overreaching and get out of the way.
So that's the big, so that's it. That's really what it is. The other piece is that many municipalities have severed the mechanical ventilation piece. So I mentioned that's like the most contentious piece. And I believe that's really it. It really is a philosophical, like that's something let's do kind of a moment. And I think because sustainability, energy conservation, environmental in general are so politically polarizing.
Sure.
Anyone who's not sort of already on board isn't going to become on board because the stretch codes make sense.
I think the other Facebook thread of comments was around the kind of like renovation question. People not knowing.
The problem with me not being on Facebook anymore.
There was a bit of a thread, I think, after the last meeting when we had that presentation. And it was around, you know, this is, well, it's two things. This is gonna make my house more expensive.
Right.
But actually less than that. It was mostly people around renovations and it's gonna make my porch more expensive or whatever. And I think that comes around understanding these things of what really gets triggered. It's gonna make your porch a little bit more expensive if you have to put more insulation in your 3-season porch or whatever. That's, I think, but it's not
But
really
even
about
that
that.
wouldn't matter because a porch would almost never be a major renovation.
These
Like, I don't know
are-
exactly
these are
where the
threads.
threshold is, but I know that
So
it's
we'll
not.
work that
so I'm
out. I
saying,
feel
like-
like we're going a bit around and around.
Right,
That's
the
good.
porch itself will need to be at a slightly higher level of standard, but that's not really material. And I think a lot of the other argument back was that these things are important to reduce energy costs, which we're all bearing a burden of and a cost of that, like energy pollution and so forth going on. So anyway,
So I have actually not heard very much comment on this, surprisingly. But the comment that I have heard has not been the get off my lawn comments.
Yeah.
It's been the, well, this is just gonna make everything I want to do at my house I already own more expensive. So that's why I really want
So
to,
this thing, but yeah,
no, not necessarily. You know, if something that would cost $5,000 will now cost $5,500, that's one thing. If something that would cost 5,000 will now cost 10, that's another. So there's going to be a need if we get questions, maybe we will. But there's going to be a need for the education piece. And I think that part is important, but in order to be able to educate someone on that, I have to be able to understand it.
yeah.
So that's where I think, that's basically the only thing that I can think of that we would need to make sure we can address if it comes up. For those kinds of, specific and practical kind of questions. That don't hopefully don't include too much interpretation of what's a major renovation and what's not.
I mean, we don't need any interpretation. If Tom answers, he will be the person doing the enforcement. So that will be a pretty.
But he won't always be.
Sure.
So we have to make sure that, so do send me the code, because I do want to look at some of those pieces and we can.
You will not enjoy that read,
No,
but,
sure.
but I will gladly send it to
It's
you.
like reading Shakespeare, you're just getting it in the rhythm of it.
I think you kind of spoke to this, you know, just in terms of the savings and long-term stuff, but my other question would be, you know, just a week or two ago, having a long conversation with some people outside of Gimme about needs for local housing. And so is there any fear that code like this, and I know it's already hard to convince people to invest in new construction in small towns. Is this an additional, would this deters like someone from saying, you know, it's hard enough to build a 55 and over community, I'm not going to do it now if your village is going to require 10% more cost?
So, no, because of that payback period, right? So anyone who's looking at this from the perspective of a business, those are not long, you know, like that return is fairly quick in terms of business. I think it's a bigger issue for individual people like Rob was talking about, someone who's on a fixed income, then like a 5, 6, 7, 8 year payback, you know, period starts to feel a lot more onerous. But I think from a business perspective, then that's not really relevant. I mean, like one of the things that we mentioned in this discussion, not we, but when I was talking with Rick and Tom, was the idea of pressing way, right? And like dropping this in the middle of a project that's already moving forward feels, I mean, likely illegal. I don't, you know, in any case, mean spirited at the very minimum. But that plan is already essentially.
It's already approved,
It's already compliant.
yeah,
No, but I mean, it's also already compliant with the.
yeah.
So
Oh, it
it's
already
like-
is, oh, right,
like,
okay.
From a business perspective, these are just efficiency upgrades that like, sure, they increase your initial investment, but they decrease operating costs by so much that
People are
it's
doing
just
it.
an intelligent move from
Yeah.
that perspective.
But it seems like some local, at least down in Ithaca, it's not uncommon for these companies to build city center and then with the idea that they're probably gonna sell in 2 years.
There's a lot of pressure for green because again, the operating costs are so low. So in the commercial world, I still, again, I don't want to cut everyone short, but I feel like we're saying the same two big concerns that I feel like you've connected with.
I just wanted to be clear, like philosophically, it's wonderful. I'm just trying to think through, I mean, what other repercussions
Absolutely.
could be part of it. And how do you talk through that?
I mean, it does disincentivize a very specific, and I would say fairly narrow band of building behaviors. So if,
Yeah, we might not even be a village where that's really gonna happen.
yeah, I'm trying to imagine, but if, I mean, you mentioned like like mini Kendall, something like that, right? So if the builder of something like that wanted to build it as cheaply and as quickly as possible, then they would probably be, they would see the stretch code and say, maybe that's too much. In my mind, that's actually a net benefit for the village,
Yeah.
because that's not the kind of building in the long-term housing stuff that we want created.
We want to see snow on every roof.
Right.
We want them
But
to be well insulated.
Like, I think to Guy's point though, like there is something to be said for like affordable housing. Maybe isn't built to the top standards, but I think the flip side of that there though is that like the operating cost of a house built to these specs is substantially lower. Which means that residents, so like in affordable housing, you're typically going to be renters at least as often as owners, in which case the operating costs are really all we care about. To me, it's a net benefit, really just like across the board.
Well, I mean, I think, and this is why I want to be clear on some of the particulars that I am interested in, because not that I'm not interested in the positions and the opinions of the folks with whom you had this conversation outside meeting. But there's a logical fallacy that has persisted in certain communities in New York, and we're one of them over the last 25 years, which is that there is something that can be done to allow for single-family construction to cost less. And that is a falsehood. And unless you get a grant and government subsidized organization like an INHS who's willing to do a big project, it's simply not true that there's something that can be done to allow for 1,800 square feet to be built at $150,000. It just doesn't happen.
But if we find that magic.
You can list a home in the village of Trimsburg is under contract in 4 days. Another one just did today. It's just people want to live here. So there's a supply and demand equation there, which is unfortunate. So I'm sensitive to the folks who would like to sell their house but stay in the community but can't, because they can't build the next house or buy the next house for what they want to pay for it. Which then does lead to, well, I'll stay here and renovate so that I can age in place on the first floor. When does that mean that they have to, whatever? And that's where reading the code, unfortunately, is going to be my only answer.
I would wait for Tom's answer.
And proportionally, what does that cost, right? Like,
Right.
That's the key.
Right, and so it's not even the cost of the project itself, but if a project leads to a requirement for something that they didn't want to do, is there a situation where that happens, which would then prevent them from doing the thing that they would want to do? I don't want to pin, I don't know how many people this will apply to, but it's not 2, it's probably a couple dozen at least in the village. I don't want to have folks who are pinched because they can't sell because they don't have somewhere to go. So they decide to do a reno, but now they can't do the reno because I want to avoid a scenario like that, which I'm not suggesting the stretch code does, but I want to be able to make sure that I can say that it doesn't.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to realize that there's probably a scenario where you've got your first floor and that says, okay, well, you've got everything buried under the studs or whatever, however strong you're going with this. You're going to have to put in a couple things that you're not planning on using, like a thing out to your garage for an EV, right? But you're ripped it down so much that we're asking you to put in an extra, a few $1,000s on top of your.
So, and that really is the question, because I can see that exact thing. We have a small bathroom. I now need to be able to walk into it with a wheelchair and sit into it. It's next to the kitchen. The kitchen also now needs to be wheelchair accessible. So now I've hit 2 major appliance areas that definitely speak to the stretch code. Do I now have to spend X amount more to meet the stretch code, whereas before I wouldn't have, I was just.
I think the reality is there's gonna be scenarios where you will have to spend it.
Yeah, so let's
As
know
long
and
as-
plan for
As
it.
long as that X amount is a reasonable amount.
That's the question.
And that you feel like, over a period of time, like resale or living at a lower cost for utilities or whatever, you're gonna read that back.
Yeah.
That's a conversation we have.
So, all of that said, procedurally, secret,
Let's do it.
how do we do secret? What are the first steps? What can we do? Tammy, Rory, looking at you guys on this one.
Yeah, so we have to declare ourselves as lead agency first, send out notices to all the adjacent agencies under the sun, giving them the opportunity to respond. I don't remember the timeline. And just what we do with comp plan, we have to,
You'll also have to go to the county, although that sounds silly.
yeah, crawl our way through part one first, but have a public hearing on the full EAF. So, yeah, I mean, I don't mind doing it concurrently. We can start that. If we should probably have Tammy and Guy set a schedule, a timeline for it. Cool. First step would be probably declaring lead agency at our meeting, our first meeting in May.
Is that something we have to notice, or is that something we can do now?
I don't know that I would do it now until we have the schedule set.
I suppose actually it doesn't make much of a difference, because that,
It's 2 weeks
2
away.
weeks out.
So you would actually start seeker, right? You would declare yourself lead agency with some type of resolution, preferably from Guy. And then we could start the wheels in motion as far as introduction and public hearing and all of that stuff, but seeker definitely has to be started.
So between now and our meeting on, what is it, the 9th?
Yes.
If you wanted to work with Tammy and Guy on a resolution to declare ourselves as lead agency,
sure.
then you could also at the same time develop a timeline of part one, part two, part three, when the public hearings have to be held and so on.
Yeah. Okay.
And that'll give me 2 weeks.
2 weeks to read the code. It's gonna rain for 2 days, maybe.
Yeah, I think you'll want to have the initial, started, like I think we passed around part one with our declaration or our intent to be lead for a comp plan. Because that basically says like, what the hell are you trying to be lead of? It's just like,
I mean, part one does nothing.
right,
It's,
Okay.
very good. Well, that's all. Thank
All
you.
right. All right, new business. We have fire inspection fees. And you can talk to the town about this, right?
yeah, I can do that. So I read through Tom's email to understand exactly what he was trying to say, because it was a little bit long-winded. My understanding, and he confirmed it this morning, is basically his ask is that we increase the fire inspection fees, which are currently at $35 per inspection, to $55 for in the case of either a rental building with more than 5 units or assemblies requiring an operating permit, which is an occupancy limit of 50 or more. He just feels, my read from his emails, he feels that those are typically take more time and effort, being that they're multiple units or larger spaces, and it would make more sense to kind of increase that from 35 to 55. All of that seems remarkably cheap in general.
Yeah, if
So
you think of it as an hourly rate, that's like below,
Right.
yeah.
So I'm inclined to just say that's good. I don't think we need a resolution for that. But if we do, I'm happy to make such a resolution. I don't know where that fits on.
Tammy, do you want a resolution to increase fire inspection fees? You're muted.
You were.
You were muted just there, Tammy.
Yeah, say it again.
Oh, sorry. I said, yeah, let's do that so that they're reflected in the minutes and then we can get them on the website.
Then I will move that we increase fire inspection fees to $55 for rental buildings with greater than 5 units and assemblies requiring an operating permit.
So moved.
So it's a motion. Jessica's our second. Any discussion or conversation?
Just to mention quickly that I also talked with Tom about this. It sounds immensely straightforward.
Yeah.
Thank you for making sure it got it.
And is that more than 5 units or 5 or more units?
That is greater than 5
Greater than
units,
5.
more than 5, that's what he had said.
Good to know. Any other questions? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Outdoor dining fees, I think we had discussed, subject to the local law that allows for outdoor seating. We discussed whether we wanted to waive the fees. We don't need to amend the local law to do that. We set fees each year by resolution, whether we wanted to waive those fees again this year. I think you mentioned that at one point. Any thoughts on?
I absolutely think we should.
We should waive the fees?
Yeah.
Why?
For outdoor dining,
Yeah,
because we would like to give our restaurants and people that have been waiting to eat at those restaurants sort of some breathing room as they're coming out of the pandemic.
can you remind me what the cost of the fees?
It's not a huge amount, but I think the bigger issue was that there's also like sketch plans and stuff. There's a fair amount of stuff, although I guess that's still in
We
there.
would still need that.
That's still in there, but the liquor authority requires it if you serve alcohol anyway, so that part's moved. It's just whether or not we want to nickel and dime.
Yeah, I would say no. I would say any way that we can make it easier.
You want to move that?
Yes, absolutely. I move that we waive fees again this year for outdoor seating permits.
Second,
Motion and a second. Any other?
we don't have, the fees in general are not in the.
Yeah, it's not
law, right?
listed.
It's just whatever we
You know, it's set by.
Subject to be set by.
Yeah. I don't have a strong need to like, that doesn't, I think for me, I guess the only time it takes is someone to process that. Application.
It's Tom's time.
Yeah, it's not insignificant.
He does, that first year, he did do some. You know, he made sure it was within the spacing that they indicated, made sure that there was enough sidewalk space to be ADA compliant for people to walk by. So it's not no time on his part.
You can read the application. At some point, it's uploaded to a digital file,
What-
stored. Oh, yeah, man. I think that I'm fine with waiving it for this year in the spirit of the emergence into rebirth. However, I think that just willy-nilly saying there's no time involved and no fee should be collected is kind of not what villages do. So I would not promote in perpetuity waiving even a $35 fee, which is kind of insignificant to the applicant, but makes a lot on the village side.
How many
That's all.
people are currently taking advantage of outdoor dining?
2,
Little Venice,
3, Creekside, Little Venice, Atlasville.
That this won't count.
That was,
It won't count.
Private property doesn't count. This is only in the sidewalk.
Oh, okay. And I don't know if Garrett's is going to, they don't right now. But I don't know if they will,
Technically, the outdoor seating requires food service.
which I thought we should really investigate. and
If you can,
change.
so that's a change in local law.
Okay. Oh, Ron Don's, is that private property too? Okay.
It's private property, that's private property.
So just Little Venice right now.
Wine
And
bar's
Creekside.
private property, so it's Creekside and Little Venice.
Creekside's not private. Yeah, it's Creekside and Little Venice. All right, okay, so that's, $70.
Yeah.
Main
I'm actually.
Street Market, don't they have tables out front?
Oh, yeah, they did a good job.
They do.
Consumer market. Yeah.
I
Okay,
agree with Jess. I like the idea of waiving it this year as the last year. And then reconsider it just to compensate for times.
I absolutely agree. I mean, if that wasn't the case, there would be a very bizarre incongruence between raising the other kids and dropping me. But I don't think there is, because again, I think encouraging, rebound is important and worthwhile.
okay,
I think I'm more inclined to support this out of the hope that it helps generate more business. I don't look at it as like I don't think of this at this point, certainly a pandemic mitigation strategy. I'm hoping that it helps, Little Venice put out or encourages them to put out more tables, but maybe it doesn't. Not a lot of people are doing it, so either way.
At the very least, it won't be a disincentive.
Right.
Right.
So that's fine.
I think Jesse's point well said, like $35 is not disincentive to any one of these companies, businesses, I don't think so.
All right, well, in any event, we have a motion and a second to waive fees for outdoor seating for the year. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Okay, Main Street garbage receptacles. Someone talk to me about that.
I think that several of us have been approached, as have members of the ETC, who want to see more garbage receptacles on Main Street. And the one area that seems to be called into specific question is the one inside, in front of the little village. And we addressed that, I think briefly addressed that last meeting, maybe that, I understand that it was removed. There was something added there that was the county receptacle with recycling and waste, but perhaps was only picked up every 2 weeks, became overflowing, became then distasteful to local business owners and also visitors to the area. That receptacle then got moved up the road where it seemed to be not so much of a problem because there weren't endless pizza boxes going into it. But now there isn't anything there, and it is sort of that grander notion of we want to encourage more people to come and be downtown, to take to-go food, to eat outside, where can they put their waste? And what can we do about that? And whose role is that? Is that DPW already picks up some amount of receptacles, right?
I don't think so.
I think so. No? Yes.
They used to,
The
so they
ones-
used to, but these are county, right?
The ones that are.
Well, no, so there's two separate things. What do we want to do as a village? What do we want the county to do? But the village already
No, it's
does
not- it's
something.
not two separate things. So those receptacles that were in front of the children's village were placed there by the county, right?
Right.
It's my understanding, yeah.
They absolutely.
They belong to the county owns them, they have to pick them up.
Yes.
That's why they were moved. They were moved to a place where they wouldn't get so full.
Yes,
so
that's
the
what I
county
said.
could pick them up.
Mhm.
So if we want as a village to start putting on more receptacles and picking them up, that's something we've never done.
But we have
So that's-
some
that's a
receptacles that we
brand
take
new-
care
They used to be the store owners in front of where those receptacles were would police them. And then haphazardly DPW would pick them up
DPW used to pick up.
Yeah.
from time to time.
I've had many like uncomfortable conversations about why are we picking this up? And they're like, well,
Guys, yeah, we absolutely, our DPW guys absolutely take care of the garbage receptacles on Main Street weekly.
But not all of
Separate
them,
from the
not
county.
not the county.
of. That's why I said it
Not
is
the
two
county,
separate things,
right.
not the
Not
county
the-
receptacles.
Not the dual ones that include trash and recyclables, those are different. They're like a hopper style, but the regular
Right.
garbage containers, we do take care of, our guys empty them weekly.
so as a quick tangent, when we got those, they were part of a pilot project to see if they would
The
work.
county one?
Do we have we ever heard anything about that? Ever?
So, yeah, so Dusty said that so we now have more than one, and my impression is we had started with one, and now we have two, there's one by Ware Silverline and one by Little Venice. And Dusty has told me that we're on a list for another one at some point, that the county has X dollars annually, and they get a couple, and they pass them out to municipalities. That's my impression of it.
That's so bizarre.
What other waste receptacles are there? I'm totally blanking on.
So it used to be that there were garbage cans everywhere,
Yeah,
All right.
but then the problem was we didn't have recycling. So the
I think that
DPW
might-
guys were just getting,
That sounds vaguely
A
familiar. There was a
mess.
big push to get a recycling bin, so,
I think so, and we did.
Right.
That's
There was
why the
also,
county,
like-
that's why the county could.
and that's where the county came
Right,
in.
but and theirs was supposed to be some kind of pilot, like they were supposed to be measuring what they took, which is why they're picking it up rather than us. But I don't know, that's bizarre. Oh,
The story I had heard from Dusty, and maybe this is also just only a partial story, was that it was placed by the little villages. And then it was eventually moved because the county wanted a place where they could affix it to the ground, and there's not a pad of concrete sidewalk there that they could actually affix it to.
okay.
And part of the reason they wanted to fix it to there is so that people aren't rummaging through it. And then apparently they had gotten enough calls or complaints from people that there was people rummaging through the recycling, pulling redeemables out or something, so it got moved. That is the story as Dusty has told it to me.
so I feel like the major, It does, but they're still
Yeah.
rummaged through and it's a,
No, specifically because of yeah.
oh, a specific incident that was,
No, it's ongoing.
But I still see
that's an
people.
Executive session.
okay. Anyway, I think that the point is, especially as we're looking at, and there may not be an answer for tonight, but it's been community concern and also as a concern of mine, as we look at having village park space that we want people to use. What is our program for waste management? What do we want to do about that? We know, and how do we want to get the answers? Like, we know 0 auctions makes for a lot of trash and just pick up anyway. We don't want to overburden the DPW. Is it something you want to subcontract out? Like, what's our long-term plan for having our green spaces usable and clean? We certainly visit many other municipalities that have trash cans, and we have had trash cans in the past. We do now. Like, what do we want to do? And again, I'm willing to say, what are all our questions before we feel like we could make answers to that?
Is the current receptacles that got moved, which I think are now down more by Silver Line?
Yeah.
Right, so there's nothing in front of the little houses.
But is that receptacle down by Silver Line, is that currently dealing with overflow issues?
Sure, it's not.
I haven't heard, yeah, I don't know.
Sure. I mean, I haven't noticed it. I mean, I go to Mini Village somewhat frequently. My first question would be, is it so far that people really can't walk down the Silver Line and throw things away?
I think they totally can, but I think that having just 2 trash cans on Main Street sounds nuts in the summer where we're trying to encourage tourism. So again, this is maybe more
How
like,
many do we actually have on Main Street?
that is the other question too. Do we still have the green? We should go check.
We have at least 2. We have one.
Well, do we have the little green one again that used to be on the telephone pole? Oh, Miss Tammy's got, we have 2 DPW ones, right?
Tammy?
No, we
Two
have,
coming.
2 that we received from the county that are
Yeah.
trash and recyclable. The rest of them they're kind of, you don't really notice them unless the garbage is flowing out of them, but it's kind of has like a wooden slat fixture.
How many of
around it,
them?
It's locked. I'm gonna say maybe 4, maybe 5, because I don't remember if there's one around the corner of Union, but there's at least one directly across the street from me in front of like the Venice area. And I'm fairly certain there's another one down by Gimme and another one down by maybe the Gem Shop and one up, so.
There
maybe
used
4.
to be, but I haven't looked in so long.
I don't,
Yeah,
so I don't think those are there. I think they must have been
Where
moved.
did they go?
I don't know.
so this is a DPW question though, right? This is a Ben.
Yeah, I'm not aware. If they've been moved, I'm not aware that they've been
There
moved.
definitely was one that was open and I thought green, I don't remember the wooden slats, by Napa, and one because of dog walking and one by the Gem Shop.
So why don't we have Ben, let's have Dusty confirm how many total garbage cans, including the counties, are out. I am entirely unsympathetic to the notion that we need to have a garbage can every 10 feet.
Me too,
You know, walk across the street and drop your garbage. You
absolutely.
know, walk 15 feet north or south and drop your garbage. Otherwise, carry in, carry out, or we'll ticket you. I
Yep.
have no sympathy to the need to have a garbage can within arm's length, or else there's a deficiency.
So there's a street view picture of a green one in front of Walk This Way in 2019, but I don't know what the hell.
So
happens.
following that run, maybe all the parks are carry in, carry out. We don't have to
I don't know
necessarily
if I'm
have
noticing
trash
it.
can, but we would then
No, you're
post
right.
carry in, carry out and,
I'm okay, I think we should have garbage cans. I
okay,
just don't think we need to have one every 15 feet. I think if there's one, you know, if the Children's Village doesn't have a garbage can, but there's one across the street at Gimme,
Yeah.
that would be close enough.
So I would say as an operating principle, it would be good to be able to see one from any given.
Okay.
I think that's a reasonable.
It's a good point. If you're at the little village, you don't see around
You
the
can't
corner.
see them there.
also have crosswalks.
Well, so I had a possibly simpler approach, or at least initial step.
They moved
It
it, that's the
was.
one that got moved.
That's the one that got moved to Silverline. And my ask, if this board's interested, is I'd be happy to talk to county solid waste and just say, hey, can you move that back to where it was? Everyone's
I
gonna
don't-
like it a hell of a lot more there.
I strongly think you should do that.
Please
What-
do.
I
Let's talk
thought I
about that
also
later.
heard that location for the Mini Village, there was something about their pickup, their truck had an issue like stopping there and picking stuff up, so they moved it to.
Only because of that crosswalk being there. 2 parking spots.
I'll bring it back around. I mean, I'm happy, if they say no.
Please don't ask to move it back.
We'll talk more then, I guess.
Yeah, let's find out how many we have first. I'll take a look.
Well, I would just say, like, now that I've been working remotely and not leaving the village every day to go to Cornell, and, been going to Gimme all last year before they moved it. Speaking of, and I don't want to get, what Roar referenced earlier, I don't want to get into the details, but I always thought it was just a terrible look for the village and visitors.
To be right where it was.
Yeah, every morning,
Yeah.
there was someone rummaging through there, literally
You're not aware of this.
pulling garbage out, piling it up next to the garbage can, right smack in front of the mini village where people were with their kids, people coming to Gimme, local and out of town. It's just like, that's the featured event every morning.
Yeah,
So that's
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And even if there weren't that, I would still say having one directly in front of the little mini village is not where you want it. It shouldn't be the thing you see. And then, by the way, these cute houses, regardless of what people are doing in it. So I'm with you on that.
And one of the other issues that we had when it was down in front of the Children's Village is that every small pizza box that came out of New York Pizzeria was stuffed directly, as they're eating it on their way out, stuffed directly into that container. And within 2 days, it was full, and they weren't coming every day to empty it, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, let's find out how many we have, and then we'll decide how many we need, and then we'll figure out who's gonna put them there.
And do you also want to think about in that the plan for green space, or wait until we identify green space use and trash cans?
The latter.
Okay, and I do want to throw out there, so it's part of everyone's collective thinking, that if the project became bigger than the DPW, could we account for that if we develop 16 new parks with all kinds of trash cans? Like at some point, could it be too much and would we just, I know, but you get what I'm trying
You're
to
lucky
say.
to get one.
Just hold in the brain that so that no one's going, oh man, I don't want to do that work. Like, no, we just want to make everything work. And if we had to consider alternatives, we could do that. And raise taxes for trash. Okay, thanks.
We'll cross that bridge when we
it's
get
just
there.
like little green friendly incinerators, it just drops them. Just gone.
You want to put Clevis Notre toilets on Main Street? I'm with you.
Yeah.
Right on the commons.
Yeah.
Full service village.
I would actually like to try to put a goal that we don't necessarily have to have resolution for this season, if that's not possible, but I feel like in 2023, we should definitely have answers. Yeah.
We'll check for how many cans are there.
I will
For
get
a
everyone an answer.
cohesive waste
next
management on
week
Main
if that's
Street
it.
in the downtown corridor, if we can't get there. I'm just saying, I'm setting the bar real low. We can do it.
I mean, I'm not against it, but it does feel like our ad hoc method.
Because I could one from the bank.
There
But
was.
there was, but I don't think there
they're
still
there
is.
anymore.
That
I
was,
think they're gone.
that was
Like,
the other one I just saw on the street view.
so there also used to be one that was right by the bridge by Creekside. That was replaced when we put that first one in. And I believe the one by Napa was replaced when that one went in. And then when that moved, those two didn't come back.
Okay,
And so there's a lot of shuffling that's happening, and then
We're all gonna be
nothing's
getting
back.
garbage cans for the next 2 days.
All right.
There is a receptacle for your eyeglasses. For the light.
That's true, and old phones.
But don't put pizza boxes.
Go for pizza boxes.
so the county waste bin was put in place of the green can that was there because there was so much.
Kind of rough. It wasn't like exactly the same, but
Because there was so much distaste for the green can that was there, that the idea that it could be a bigger and county managed thought to be a solution, and then it
I think it was driven mostly by recycling. People didn't want to be throwing their garbage.
and also the county pilot project.
I know, but Michelle, right, okay, so someone talked to Michelle, right, and we can verify the 90% sure statement. Okay, never mind. Okay, great, garbage, moving forward. What's so mafia?
Okay, so last item of new business is just more of an FYI, but also something for us to consider. There has been an official amendment to open meeting law procedures, which will be effective in June. we're still under the governor's state of emergency, which allows for remote meetings, but once that has lapsed, effectively on June 15th, I think, they've changed open meetings law to allow for remote attendance by members of a particular board for specific reasons only. And then under those circumstances, the requirement to notice, you have to notice the location of where that board member is joining remotely, but you don't have to allow public attendance at that location.
Oh, goodness.
So previously, the way open meetings law currently reads is you can have video conferencing, but only if that board member's location is noticed and the public is allowed to attend there. So essentially, if you want to join from home, you have to notice the location and allow the public into your living room. That has been amended so that you still have to notice the location, but you don't have to allow public attendance there, but only for certain reasons. Otherwise, you can have video conferencing wherever you want, but the public has to be allowed to attend. So a large entity like a consortium, we can have remote locations all over central New York, but the public has to be allowed to attend.
Mhm.
If you want to attend remotely for a meeting, for a village board meeting, we have to notice the location, but you don't have to allow the public in, but it can only be for certain reasons like sickness, caring for someone else. There are a handful of other things.
So it's not really friendly to
Correct.
flexibility.
Furthermore, in order to allow for that to take place, the local municipality now has to adopt a local law, which includes procedures as to how those situations will be managed.
Hmm.
So we can either journey down that road so that if someone isn't feeling well, they can attend remotely. And this actually does include front office folks. So we would have to adopt the local law with the rules attached so that we can allow for these circumstances to take place, or we go back to the old way of doing things and everyone shows up in person no matter what.
Can we still post a Zoom link for participants?
Public can still attend via Zoom.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
So I bring it up tonight only for initial thoughts and direction in which to proceed. Heck with it, we'll go back to all in-person meetings unless something comes up, then we develop a local law later, or let's give ourselves as much flexibility as our betters in Albany will allow us to have, and start down that road.
And what's the notice? What's the advance notice?
Bless you. I don't believe there is one. It just has to be, the location has to be stated where so-and-so is joining from.
So it isn't advance notice?
Because the public's not allowed to attend,
Oh, okay.
but you have to say so-and-so is attending
Remotely from
remotely
900.
from such and such address
Jamaica.
due to, and I think that's part of what has to be included in the local law is what.
Wow.
This is strange to me because we never did this,
Right.
right? Like this was always a requirement and we never did it.
So there was a handful of times when some of us attended remotely, but we couldn't vote.
Oh, that's right.
That's kind of, yeah.
So we didn't notice it. Public wasn't allowed to go there, but you couldn't vote. So you're not really attending as a board member.
Right.
Uh-huh. Again, what's before us is we can say, sure, we're gonna adopt that, and then you have to just notice where you're attending from virtually based on these criteria, or nope, we're not even gonna entertain it at all, and you have to be present or you're homesick. Those are the options.
Basically.
I'm inclined to give us as much flexibility as we can bring out.
Yeah, I mean, it's not much flexibility, it's really a detriment to expanding opportunities to government. If that's the best we did, but if you have to do it.
This is like all the lessons you learned in the pandemic.
Yeah, forget that.
There's definitely 100% the wording of the law is one which says, well, it also requires a quorum to be present at the primary location.
Right.
So it's 100% not interested in expanding opportunities for people to attend. That was not a consideration. This was purely a concession to pandemic and post-pandemic life, right?
Key colleagues and.
Kid got sent home, waiting on the PCR test. You have a meeting tonight.
Right.
Well, now you can attend.
Yeah.
But the idea that we want people to be able to attend meetings for greater participation, that's not a thing in Albany.
Certainly not for like our participation. Like we're for sure about the total for that.
So if there's interest in it, I will start to move forward with drafting something and have the guy opine. And then we can go from there. Have that adopted sometime in the June timeframe.
I mean, I saw some stuff posted about this, a little bit, other municipalities talking about it, like what's the injustice we're trying to recorrect for here? I mean, like, is there some rash of insecurity by people being home and voting?
There's a significant, and some of them are people we know in Tompkins County. There's a significant sentiment that says meetings should be in person.
Mhm.
And that the public has the right to see you in person and see you conduct your business in person. And then you have about half of the folks who feel that way also have a 19th century sense that if you're meeting from home, then someone could potentially
Rasputin is in your ear and we can't see them.
have undue influence over you because we can't see who's riding you
And they forgot.
or threatening you.
That's why I take all the credit before I come.
It's not funny.
So the influence of the 19th century is still strong.
And it's as if someone watching on live stream, right? It could be just text me right now. Don't vote for that. Vote for that. Don't vote for that. Vote for that.
I mean,
Or sending
I
a
don't know,
bird.
I believe very strongly in the premise of like public meetings. But the whole thing is asking, there's no reasonable justice.
But please pursue it. I mean, I think that we want to encourage, as long as life is healthy, that we all can be in the same room together because there's benefit for that, but please pursue it. I would say option,
Yeah.
Even if you want to say.
especially for
like,
traveling members.
elected officials should not exceed 25% remote attendance or something like
doesn't
that.
make sense, though. mean,
I know it doesn't, none of it makes sense, but at least that would be
It's
better
really
than
just
just
illness.
saying it's
Or
just illness.
It's
Can't
illness,
come and
illness
go
of a
sick.
family member, or some type of
Bereavement.
care is.
But you have to like notice the public that you have the flu.
When you have to notice your physical address for wherever you happen to be.
But not, this is saying you don't have to.
You don't have to make it public.
You don't have
You
to
do
allow
have to
public in
say
here.
where you.
Oh, but you have to say. oh,
Right, so if you're traveling, imagine you're traveling, you have to give your hotel
I
number.
mean, room number.
I don't think
Right,
travel,
like-
and I don't think travel is one of them. I don't.
No, it's
I don't
not.
think travel
But you
is-
could hypothetically be ill and traveling.
Oh,
I'm just gonna throw it out there, you can file that one away.
But then
wherever
the
you wanna file
traveling
it.
would already negate the illness, so it wouldn't matter.
Depends which happened first, I guess.
also if
I
you're
was
super.
planning
I had to
Yeah.
travel because I'm ill. That would.
I got ill and had to.
I had to get a kidney transplant. I'm allowed to attend.
I wasn't feeling well. I haven't seen the sun in 6 months. So I had to travel somewhere warm.
Give doctor's orders. I mean,
Doctors.
that is a real thing, all
I
right?
need vitamin D. All right, I'll start working on that.
Very-
Item number 8, second privilege of the floor. There are no members of the public present in person or online, so I would entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss a number of personnel issues as well as contract negotiations subject to the Taylor Act.
So.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are in executive session. Let me stop.